we're going to trade off doing some sort of therapy exercise with each other. Because for me, I'm used to being the one asking all the questions. And then for you, obviously, you're a therapist. So that's like your job.
Yeah. You'll close your eyes and you'll envision your childhood bedroom. Picture yourself as a child, whatever age makes sense for that, on the bed, sitting down, and then look to the doorway. And then you, as yourself right now, you walk in and you walk to the bed and you sit down with yourself. What would you say to yourself? What does that child in that moment need to hear?
I would tell myself, I'll have you close your eyes too. Look at your life now. Think of a few things that you are dissatisfied with. Think about the colors and the textures and the shapes that they represent.
What I'm picturing is like this gray sphere.
I want you to hold that in your hands, and then I want you to pull it in to your chest. Embrace this thing that is causing you pain, anger, or sadness. And then what we're going to say to that object is, you belong here. I know that you don't have anywhere else to go, and you're safe here. How does that feel?
It feels interesting because
Hey guys, the guest of today's episode is Kati. She is a licensed therapist, and due to the nature of her work, we will be discussing mental health issues and suicide and other heavy topics, especially towards the beginning. If you don't want to hear anything like that, feel free to skip around or find another episode to enjoy. Just thought that I would give you that heads up. Alrighty, thanks. Miss Kati, welcome to episode 10 of Question Everything.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Really quick, tell us about you and what you do.
Yeah. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I have my own private practice. So I do outpatient mental health counseling for people who have mental health problems and addiction problems. And I see teenagers, young adults, kids, and then some older adults as well.
Okay.
So kind of all over the place, yeah.
Yeah, that's covering a lot of ground. What's your main focus and approach? Because every therapist, psychologist has their own lens that they view human behavior through. So what's that for you?
Yeah. So I pull from so many different ones, honestly, and everybody's, stuff is so different. In sessions, I'll use a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy as an approach, and also some dialectical behavioral therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy is helpful for anxiety. A lot of the times we have these really negative automatic thoughts or automatic thoughts that are unhelpful. And so CBT is really helpful for figuring out how is my thought impacting my feeling, impacting my actions. And then we restructure all of that, starting with the thought process. And then dialectical behavioral therapy is helpful for distress tolerance, sitting with really big feelings, using coping skills instead of being reactive. But I'll use a combination of both of those in session, just wherever I see fit, just kind of throw them in there. But I use both of them probably pretty equally.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was curious about the difference between the two. So if you could break it down in like one sentence, what's the difference between the two approaches?
That's a good question.
Like I'm a fifth grader and you're like, hey, I'm going to use these two approaches to help you with what you're dealing with.
CBT is like a triangle if you think about it. And so it's like we start at one, we move to the other, and then down and back all over again.
Okay.
Dialectical literally means two things holding true at the same time. So I would say that those are pretty much the difference.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. I like that.
Yeah.
That's cool. So this is a very interesting duo at the moment because the title of the podcast is Question Everything. And I would assume that is how you approach therapy too, where you have to drop all assumptions and go in curious, both parties. You can't help if you're not curious, and they can't be helped if they're not curious.
Right.
So I'm curious what your experience with that has been and what maybe your relationship to the phrase question everything is.
Yeah. So in my sessions, I probably 80% of my sessions, right? Like someone will say something, like they'll say something about their family or their partner or like their job, and I will typically respond with a question. And that's helpful because if I ask you a question, you're leading the direction, right? Like you're going to give me an answer and I'm going to ask another question.
Yeah.
And so it's helpful for letting clients navigate their own sessions without even realizing what they're doing. But, you know, I mean, there's definitely like space to just sit there and validate also and not ask questions. But I think when we ask questions, it gets you thinking, right? So like I can't be much help if I don't understand fully what's going on. And so I think, you know, by asking those questions, it subconsciously leads you to navigating like your own path for that therapy session.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
What long-term effects do asking questions have for somebody? Like, let's say somebody comes into therapy and they just have all of these concrete ideas of their life and why it is the way it is and whose fault it is. What do questions do for them?
Well, I think it helps get unstuck. And I do have and have had some clients who are very much like they come in and they're like, this is it. This is the way that it is. This is how it's going to be. And I think that that's like being in that space. It's just I can't help move forward. You know what I mean? I can encourage you to shift your mindset, look at some potential cognitive distortions that are happening and things like that. But when you get someone who's so concrete that way and not asking questions or not like looking inward or, you know, things like that, we're stuck. And that's where, you know, my sessions typically halt. That's where I start to feel like, am I even doing anything? You know what I mean? And
do you want to be helped?
Right. And yes, and that's kind of what it comes to a lot is you'll get clients who are so concrete, which that is something that we can work on. But if they're not willing to be flexible with their, you know, thought patterns and things like that, then it is kind of like, well, what are we doing? You're kind of questioning, like, why did you come to therapy? Especially when
who sent you here?
Right. Especially when you get the people who are so concrete that like you'll challenge and then they shut it down and they're just, you know, they don't like that sometimes. And so that makes it really difficult.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with astrology at all?
I mean, I know I'm a Virgo, but not much else. Not really. No.
Gotcha. Okay. So this is really interesting. I bring this up because I was very turned off to the idea of astrology for a long time, and I just wrote it off because it's always the loudest, most extreme people in every group that unfortunately that's what you think of when you think of that group, and they don't represent the majority. And so I always saw people excusing their shitty behavior for their sign, like, oh, I'm just a whatever and I can't help it. So I was like, this is dumb. But a therapist said something, it was like a TikTok of some sort. She was saying, out of all of the people that I've treated, there's one specific sign, and I can't remember what sign it was. I think it was either Sagittarius or Gemini, but they're like, I never see them in therapy. Like, Gemini is Sagittarius, as they do not come to therapy, which was really interesting. And I was like, okay, like maybe there's something here. So I'm curious if you'd be open to like looking into that, and because you have people's birthdays whenever they.
Yeah.
Is there an intake form where you get their birthday?
Yes. They fill some stuff out. It's just like in the way that it works is the way that it shows up to me is sometimes weird. So sometimes I get new clients depending on like where I plug them into whatever platform I'm using for them. And I'm like, and also how old are you? Like it doesn't tell me sometimes.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Well, if you are able to get their birthday, I would recommend just like looking into astrology because it might help kind of like right off the bat get an idea of what might their tendencies be, what might be their hang-ups. And then you can feel like a psychic when you're like, do you struggle with this thing without even like, but yeah, I bring that up because you were saying that, you know, there are some people that are very concrete in their idea of how things operate. And whenever you challenge it, they just shut it down. And it just made me think of some specific people that I know. So.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I'm sure that there's some truth to that.
So yeah, this is really cool. How long have you been doing therapy?
So I've been in private practice for about 3.5, a little over 3 years, maybe closer to 3.5 years. I've been on my own for a year.
Sweet.
And then I've been full-time on my own for only a month. And then before that, I worked at Vanderbilt, I worked at Vandy for 2 years, which it wasn't quite therapy. It was inpatient psych.
Interesting.
Very.
Was that at the hospital?
Yep.
Wow.
Inpatient child and adolescent psych.
So what was that experience like compared to what you're doing now?
It's so different. The levels of acuity in the hospital are incredibly high. Vandy is also one of the only hospitals in the area that will take kids who are, I forget the cutoff, but I know that we were the only place that could take like 5-year-olds. And so we would get kids that young. And so, can 5-year-olds have mental health problems? Yes, of course. And also a lot of it's behavioral, which stems from something, but
Totally.
so for the most part, the hospital was a lot of acute suicidal teenagers and children. Pretty much, I would say about probably a third of them, if not more, were suicidal or had committed suicide.
Whoa.
Or not committed, I'm sorry, attempted.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I was about to say,
Like, how are they in the
you're
hospital?
dealing with ghosts? Like, okay. Gotcha.
Attempted.
Gotcha.
Another good chunk of them were substance use, and then the other little bits of them were probably a combination of kids with autism, behavioral dysregulation stuff,
Wow.
psychosis, which isn't common, but it happens, and then catatonia too.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was quite the mix.
Yeah, that's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm curious and I'm going to put a disclaimer at the beginning of this episode because I know that it's just good to do that.
Yeah.
But for me, I was suicidal at like 12, 13, 14, that area. I'm curious the youngest that you've seen, like a kid be suicidal.
Yeah. I would say, we would get the 5-year-olds who would say that they want to die, but I don't know that that's like true intent suicidal thought. I would say that the youngest probably like 8 or 9, but I would also say that in that age group, their ideas of, they have those feelings, right? They're like, I don't want to be here anymore, I want to die.
Yeah.
But the attempts that we see at that age are not, they're not going to be successful, right? Like they're, things like I'm going to bang my head against the wall or, something like that. Whereas like the older that we get, the more acute we see the actual attempts being.
Yeah.
So that's where we get the kids like med flighted and things like that and from other states or cities.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Yeah. I empathize with that situation a lot, and I'm curious what your thoughts are. This is a totally random direction, but I know what it's like to be in that place, and it's not fun. I didn't have anybody to really help me out of that, and so thankfully I can say now, like, I don't want to die. I want to be here, but I'm curious what you think is behind that at that age. Because we're like, a lot of your practice revolves around healing the inner child. And at this point, especially, you were dealing with children that were at a point where like healing was probably the only thing they needed, like, and the main thing that would help them.
Yeah.
So where are they at when they're in that stage, and where is it coming from?
Yeah. I feel like there's usually 3 main like kind of places that comes from. I would say the first is family, whether that be, we would see lots of kiddos who are coming from DCS, Department of Child Services custody, group homes, things like that, where family, there's just like no structure, or they're being, being or were being abused. I think family is a really big one. Trauma also, like whether that be physical, emotional, sexual, that's a big contender. And then I would also say that there's lots of kiddos who struggle with just like anxiety and depression so bad that that just feels like the answer.
Yeah.
And so,
Even that young, they're already.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
We'd also get quite a few kiddos, maybe not quite a few, but a handful of kiddos who have OCD, which I don't know how much you know about OCD, but basically part of OCD is that you have suicidal thoughts, but they're you have them and you think about dying, and your mind is kind of telling you that you should kill yourself, but they're also ego dystonic. You're like, but I don't want that. I don't want to do that. But then they feel like they have to because it's compulsive.
Is that every part of OCD, or is that just like there are certain types of OCD where that's present?
There's different types. OCD is so fascinating. I love working with people who have OCD because I have OCD. So I think,
That's cool.
so I think it's super interesting. There's a ton of different, you think about OCD and you hear like, oh, turn the sink on and off 12 times. Like,
Yeah.
can that be a part of it? Yeah, that's a compulsion. But also it's like those ego dystonic thoughts. It's graphic intrusive images. It's, it can be so many different things too.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are you able to diagnose that kind of stuff?
OCD?
Yeah.
Yeah. So with my license type, I can diagnose any like mental health disorders. I mean, that doesn't mean that I'm qualified to diagnose like someone with, say, like a personality disorder. I don't typically feel comfortable diagnosing that.
Sure.
But there are like certain measures that we use too, which are helpful tools. Like anxiety has a screening, and you get a number from that, which puts someone on a scale of, being not anxious at all versus, severely anxious. Depression has the same thing. OCD has the same thing.
ADHD.
ADHD. So I don't think I would diagnose ADHD either. Sometimes I see it in people, ADHD and ADD. But I don't know, that feels a little bit out of my comfort zone.
But OCD isn't.
No.
Because you're.
Yeah, the ADHD, well, I think like with ADHD, like the answer for most people is they typically jump right to medication. And so honestly, I don't even typically see people who are like, I'm struggling with my ADHD. They're
Gotcha.
usually already medicated by the time they make it to me. So, yeah.
What is your opinion on medication for mental health stuff?
Yeah. I think, it's different for everybody. I think we know, and I know from working in the hospital that, and alongside like many brilliant doctors and nurse practitioners, only 1/3 of people who try their first medication will actually have success. It's a lot of trial and error with often side effects. And it can work incredibly well. Like there are some conditions that need medication. Like you can't see someone with psychosis and hope that they just work their way out of it.
Yeah.
They need medication. And so I think it definitely has its place. Working with teenagers and kids, though, I think there's a lot of parents who feel really reluctant about that because they think we're starting at 9, 10, 11, 12, whatever. My kid's going to be on medication forever. But it's also not the goal. And we know that the best combination of what it makes someone successful with their mental health journey is the combination of therapy and medication.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And does that mean that over time the goal is to wane off of the medication?
Yep. So our like nurse practitioners and doctors, when they would prescribe meds, they would always preface with saying like, when parents would say like, I don't want them on this forever. They would say like, the goal is to just like get them through the now, let them work on some coping skills, have some things that can kind of be a safety net. And then, in a year and a half, whatever it might be, then they can kind of transition off. Yeah. And that's not to say that they might not need it again in the future.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's just like a nice crutch to have. So.
So what instance would you say medication is a bad idea, or maybe not even a bad idea, but like you don't need this, or you probably shouldn't even mess with it because of side effects or whatever? And like at what point do you think somebody should just work through it on their own, or like with therapy and non-invasive stuff like that?
Yeah. I feel like if they're treatment naive, maybe. I mean, it's so hard to say, like, because everyone's situation has so many different factors around it. It's hard to say but this specific person wouldn't benefit or would benefit. But But if they're treatment naive, like that's what I see. Is I see a lot of kiddos in my practice now who have not had any kind of therapy, and then their parents, I also have parents who are like, we don't want to put them on meds, we want to try this first. And I'm open to that. I'm open to give that a go. Because like if you have, issues like self-esteem, say, you can give them an antidepressant. Is it going to make them feel better in the moment? Totally. And also it's not giving them any tools to fix their self-esteem. And so once we pull that off, if we don't have the therapy and we're not, actively working through that, pull the medication off, and now we have no tools.
And they're still going to hate themselves.
Right. So, I mean, I'm definitely, like I said, not a doctor, but I see it in so many different ways. I see how incredibly beneficial it is for people. I've seen it change people's lives. And I've seen people who, especially people who are, my age, women specifically, who it's making things a little bit harder rather than better.
Do you think that's because of hormones?
Totally. I think there's, oh my God, I could go on a rant about hormones and just like the things that are put into women's bodies. And yeah,
that's a bag of cats for sure.
Yeah.
Just talking about like you've treated children and adults at this point. Do you see any difference in the difficulty of healing the inner child of a child who's literally still a child versus an adult?
Yes and no. I think that children, when I work with them, like they still, typically they don't have the mindset of this will never get better because that's not been a lived experience for that long for them. Whereas adults are like, things have not changed for me for 15 years. Why would it change now? So I think as we get older, which developmentally this makes sense, that as we get older, things are a little bit more concrete, whereas the kiddos don't have the ability to even think that far ahead. Frontal lobe is still cooking, so they're not like able to sit back and think like, wow, this is how it's going to be for the rest of my life. They're just not there yet.
They can't even think about the rest of their life.
Yeah, right. Yeah. They can't conceptualize that. So I think, the older that we get, I think we kind of drag ourselves into this space of, this is concrete, or like, this has been my experience before, so why would it not be my experience now? And I always say, like, that mindset is like, it makes sense, right? Like if you went to go pet a dog and every time you pet a dog, the dog bit you, you're probably going to think that every time I pet a dog, it's going to bite me. It makes perfect sense. Yeah. And sometimes it's just like that's where that, intense concreteness comes in, where it's like, I just want you to see it this way so badly, and you can't.
Yeah. That's interesting. So the challenge with children is that they a lot of times are still in it. They're still in the thick of it. They're still in the situation that's causing them trauma. But they have a lot more neuroplasticity.
Right.
And then with adults, they're removed from the situation most of the time, but they have no neuroplasticity. And so they're like, their brain has found proof that their situation isn't going to get better, and it holds on to that conviction.
Yeah, essentially. And it's hard because I think like with adults too, when I'm working with them, I'm like, here's like, we're like playing connect the dots, Yeah. And I'm like, this sounds like it's stressful for you. How can we avoid that or manage that better? And then when you have kids, so often it's something family related, environment related, peer related, school, stuff like that. And we can't pluck them out of that.
Yeah.
So that is also something where it's like, we can't remove them from much. So that makes it hard too.
Yeah. Yeah, this there was something that I read a while ago when it's talking about just how our brains work, and it said your brain is a proof-seeking machine. And like ever since I heard that, I started to look for evidence of that. And that's, I think, the big draw for the law of attraction, manifestation, all that stuff, is that it's less about if it's literal magic or if, all that. And it's more of just whatever you focus on, it starts to actually become your reality in a way.
Oh, yeah.
So is there a part of your practice that focuses on shifting the mindset for, especially, I guess, for adults who have that concrete assumption of reality? And if so, what's your approach to that?
Yeah. Well, I think like the way that I typically phrase that is like we have this like self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So it's like if I'm working with someone who has social anxiety, um, and their automatic negative thought is that when I meet people, they don't like me. Well, what does that do? Now I'm guarded. Now I'm going to approach like things feeling very standoffish. I might not be as friendly. And then now I'm meeting people and they're probably thinking, what the heck is that? Like, what is her problem? And it's not that like I created that situation. And so, yeah, I
Yeah.
think we sometimes we navigate things based on these automatic thoughts and anxiety, amongst other things, and we create our own reality that way unintentionally. So sometimes I say, there are always going to be external factors, right? Like sometimes it's finances, sometimes it's work, sometimes it's education. Like it can be a ton of things.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's literally just you. And so we have to figure out, how do I get myself out of my own way?
I
Which
like
is,
that.
that's a challenge.
Yeah. No, it's really cool looking at it from both angles too, because the way I would have thought about that situation is you think when I meet people, they don't like me. And so it's all just a mental game where you go in and anything that might indicate to you that they don't like you, you take that as evidence that they don't
Yeah.
like you. And so you're adding another layer to it, which is you're already going in physically in a different state. Like you're already physically expecting them to not like you, which makes you unlikable.
Right.
So that's an interesting, again, self-fulfilling prophecy, a cycle that just kind of repeats over and
Totally.
over. So,
Yeah.
wow. So we have something exciting planned for the rest of this episode.
Yeah.
And I'll give a little disclaimer at the beginning of the episode so people know to look forward to it, but maybe not. I might just bamboozle you. But we're basically we're going to trade off doing some sort of, I guess, a therapy exercise with each other. Because for me, I'm used to being the one asking all the questions on my podcast and really just like all of the philosophy stuff that I do in general. And then for you, obviously, you're a therapist. So that's like your job.
Yeah.
So we're going to start with you kind of introducing either some exercises or one exercise or whatever. I don't know what you have planned for me. So yeah, take as long as you need. And I'm open.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Buckle up.
yes.
Okay. So this is an exercise that I do with clients who have had difficult childhoods or have struggled. Even if they've had a great childhood, it can still be helpful. But basically, I'll walk you through it. But remember, keep in mind that the intention of this exercise is to essentially reflect on who you are now,
Okay.
with the idea of your childhood and your child self in mind. So,
Gotcha.
okay, so you'll close your eyes and you'll envision your childhood bedroom.
Which one?
Whatever one stands out the most to you.
All
So
right.
envision your
I got
childhood
it.
bedroom and then picture yourself as a child, whatever age makes sense for that, on the bed, sitting down. And then look to the doorway. And then you, as yourself right now, you walk in.
Whoa. That's actually really cool to think about.
And you walk to the bed and you sit down with yourself. And then the question is, what would you say to yourself? What does that child in that moment need to hear? And you can think on that and take as much time as if you feel like you need.
I'm just like, I guess, oh, it's so funny. Something's already coming up. Just my reaction is to like, I don't know, like laugh about it and kind of like lighten the mood, which I know this is a thing that I struggle with. I'm currently working on not feeling the responsibility to make people laugh all the time or lighten the mood. So with that said, I think the first thing that I would tell him especially because I didn't know why, out of all of the childhood bedrooms that I had, this one that instantly came to mind was actually it was a 100-year-old house that we lived in. I grew up in a very low income family, and this my dad's boss was gracious enough to let us like rent this house that was on a property that he owned, and super old house. A lot of memories there. Very difficult time in my life. And the first thing I would tell myself is that everything's going to be okay. Which I'm not sure how common of an answer that is. I would assume that's fairly common. I would tell myself love is real, and that there's plenty of love for me, and that someday I will find people that truly love me in the way that I need. I know that there were people in my life at the time that tried, but I still felt empty. I would also tell myself to that I'm an artist. That feeling that I have where like I have all this creativity, that I really need to lean into that and to not stop and to not let anybody get in the way of that. And I would honestly tell myself that that's the most important thing, is for me to lean into my creativity and ask a lot of hard questions. Because if I would have done that sooner, not that I wish anything was different now, but I would have been in a better place a lot more often. So I would tell myself things about my life now, that I'm happily married in a house that I love with a beautiful dog, and found a friend that actually is a good friend to me. And yeah, I would tell myself all of the things that are ahead, because I think that me back then, what I really needed was hope.
Anything else?
Not really.
You can open your eyes. How did it feel?
I teared up for sure.
Yeah.
Which, man, just that thought. Like, I've actually thought about the concept of that before, of like approaching your younger self, just like giving them a hug, being like,
I know it,
yeah. But I guess that choosing, like when you said your childhood bedroom, like I know some people, they grew up in the same house. Other people moved a million times.
Yep.
So that's a very interesting aspect of that exercise, is there's going to be something that, like, I joked saying like which one, but I had one in mind already.
Yeah. What do you think makes you gravitate towards that time period in your life? Because I also had a handful of childhood bedrooms growing up. But when I had that, did this exercise myself, I also went to one. Didn't even consider the others, which I thought was really interesting. But what do you think about, like, what was the age that you were in, and what was that time period of your life like?
If you had asked me to look at it logically, which is what I do all the time, and it's to a fault.
Mm-hmm.
I would have actually picked the house after this one.
Okay.
Because the house after this one, that's when I was 12, 13, 14.
Mm-hmm.
I was depressed, suicidal. That was like I had a serious addiction. It was really bad.
Mm-hmm.
The house before this, it was that transition point. I was 8, 9, 10
Mm-hmm.
in this house. My mom was sick all the time
Mm-hmm.
and was just in bed all the time. She would come out for evening, maybe to make dinner. And interestingly enough, this was also the time where I would stay up later, just standing in the kitchen talking to her.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like the only person that I could do that with. And I was a kid. I had a lot of these crazy ideas, and I was philosophizing about stuff at a very young age, and I didn't realize that's what it was. But it's like my mom was like the only person that was there, but also like absent at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Physically present, emotionally unavailable?
It's a good question. It was like a mix of both.
Okay.
It stuff with my mom's health is very weird. It's like one of those just one of those cases where doctors just don't know what the hell is going on, and it's all like new to them and whatever. It's been like that for a long time, but she was very sick, and I'm sure that a lot of it was emotional, and it wasn't just physical. But yeah, it was weird. It was a very weird time. My dad was always working, which isn't different from any other time. And yeah, like I saw my dad at dinner time. That was basically it. And at church. This was also the time in my life where I started really having questions about religion. And I think things after this got really dark.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that I went right to this this shitty bedroom at the corner of this super old house with windows that leaked air. And it was me and my brothers, or no, my other brother wasn't even born yet. Yeah, just me and my brother. Bunk bed. I was on the bottom bunk. It was in the corner. Like I envisioned the room again. And yeah, I guess everything that I would have told myself is like, you're about to enter the darkest time of your life. And you need some sort of North Star.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what I noticed was that when you said that this was right before all of that happened, was that this is kind of like the last little moment of sparkle, and that
Yeah,
you
probably.
you were coming to say, hey, like this is going to be hard, but don't lose hope. Things will be better. Things will get better. Whatever you're about to go through, shitty as it might be, it will not be forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a very interesting exercise. And I do that exercise because what tends to happen is that when we have, even if we have a childhood that's like sparkly and perfect and shiny and white picket fence, which I didn't have, and I don't know that childhood, but
Yeah.
even if you do, I think that we still have, like, everyone has some kind of like experience that shakes them or like changes them or something like that. And so
Yeah.
the purpose of the exercise is essentially to reflect on who you are now compared to then, because what happens is when we plug ourselves into that moment, we tend to become the adults that we needed in that moment, but we didn't have. And so it's a helpful way to kind of see things full circle.
Yeah. I'm the oldest, so I didn't.
Same.
Yeah. You know how it is. Like almost wishing you had yourself as an older sibling, but who you are now. Because if I had myself as an older sibling back then, I'm sure I would have made it worse.
Yeah, my poor sisters.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Making yourself the adult that you needed. Like I've put a lot of work in to to heal and to just be better. You know, I think self-improvement can be toxic. It can actually make you feel worse about yourself all the time because you never feel good enough. You always have to improve yourself. And I'm actually changing the way that I approach the concept of self-improvement, where instead of improvement, it's more of just personal growth.
Yeah.
Because I came up with a question last week, and the question is an oak tree better than an acorn? It's maybe we don't know the answer to that. Like maybe it serves different functions, but it's not better than an acorn. Like the acorn will become an oak tree. So it's not, the acorn isn't improving itself. It is growing stronger, and it's growing bigger, and it's reaching up and out, but it's not improving itself.
Yeah.
So like that's maybe another thing that I would have needed is like, look, you don't need to be fixed.
Yeah.
You just need to focus on growth. And it's a subtle difference.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting the way you kind of mentioned to yourself, like you have these creative outlets, like tap into those, utilize those, because I think, you know, maybe what we realize or we don't realize is that when we have outlets, whether that be creative outlet, whether that be sports or the gym or running, like anything, right? Like those are coping skills and those are coping mechanisms. And so I think it's interesting that you like brought that to yourself and you were like, tap into that, like almost like you want to be like, use these as skills, as an outlet. It will make you feel better.
Yeah. Yeah, it is weird because shortly after this, at like age 12, I figured out that I could play the piano by ear. It was like random thing. It was actually, I had watched Monsters vs. Aliens, and that song Axel F, when he's like up at the spaceship, like playing the song, I had that song stuck in my head, and I was at church one day, and I sat down at the piano, and I just like it was stuck in my head. I wanted to get it out. You know, like 10 minutes later, I figured it out.
Wow.
And I was like, I didn't realize how significant that moment was. Looking back, that's one of the most significant moments in my life because I was already writing poetry. If I can play by ear naturally, I just moved into songwriting, and I was not like an incredible songwriter by any means, but it was an outlet.
Yeah.
And I had little things that I enjoyed. I enjoyed writing short stories, like fantasy. I always did really well with that in school. Like my teachers were always impressed with what I was doing. I loved drawing, even though I wasn't great at it. I did songwriting, and so I had these little creative outlets. But as I moved into like later high school, especially after high school, I traded a lot of that creativity for pleasure. And that's where that was coming from, is like, don't let any heartbreak, any bad relationship, don't let anything convince you that you're not enough or that you need to sacrifice this creativity so that you can be more cold and stoic, and like none of that matters.
Yeah. Yeah. You make a good point too. I think a lot of the times, especially with kids and teenagers and even adults, which I think it's just more at the forefront for kids and teenagers, about trying new things and then not being immediately good at it or not being good at it at all is such a reason for them to just like shut down and not have that. And I think you make a good point of saying like, I love to draw, but I wasn't good at it. Like you don't have to be. It just has to be something that feels like a release. It just has to be something that feels good and is helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, the emphasis on things being good is, first of all, good is subjective.
Totally.
And then also with the internet, this is something I see a lot of kids struggling with. I struggle with it already, where you see the top 0.001% of people, right? You see the sexiest, richest, most talented people on the internet. That's what you see. I see 19-year-olds with a Lamborghini. Not that I would choose a Lamborghini, but I'm like, what the hell am I doing wrong?
Yeah.
And I'm I'm past that, but I can only imagine being a kid now growing up with the internet and just not feeling good enough.
Oh, totally. Oh, I see it all the time too. So many, I mean, it's everybody, but I work with a lot of teenage girls who are like, but so and so, like Instagram influencer, model, blah, 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 whatever. And I'm like, it's not real,
Yeah.
And they don't realize that. Sometimes I even catch myself, I'll be on TikTok, embarrassingly enough, I'll be scrolling or something and I'll hear something and I'll say it to my boyfriend or something and he's like, where did you hear that? And I'm like, TikTok. And then I'm like, oh my God, wait.
That's weird.
Just because I heard it on TikTok does not mean that it's real. Like I have to catch myself. And I'm like, if I'm a 28-year-old mental health professional who should, in theory, be able to filter some of the things out that are real or not real, can't. Kids are just like consuming that. You know?
Soaking it up.
Yeah.
Because they're sponges.
Yeah.
Yeah. Curious if you have any other thoughts or questions or.
The only other piece of that exercise that I typically throw in is just a reflection of like your life now versus then, which you've kind of touched on a little bit. But what are some of the like contrasting differences that you feel like stand out as a theme in your life now that were either different or absent as a child? You mentioned that love was different, whatever that might mean to you. But what else, like, would you say stands out as a theme for that?
Part of this is, I think, just due to the time difference. Like, it takes time.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of things take time.
Mm-hmm.
I have a clear sense of purpose now, which I didn't before.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't be all that interesting in a normal setting. But I did grow up, I grew up Mormon. And there is and I believe that religion is a cult. And you're supposed to feel a great sense of purpose. Really, I think just most evangelical Christians, right? Because the goal is to spread the gospel. Like your purpose is to share the light of Christ with others, which the way that I look at it is you don't want to burn in hell, so you want to do good stuff, and you're telling everyone else that you know the only way to not burn in hell.
Yeah.
That's essentially what's going on, right? And so I had a manufactured sense of purpose, but I never resonated with it at all. I was always told at church, Sunday school, all this stuff like, oh, you need to be sharing the gospel. I was the only Mormon kid in my school. And some people knew, and it was embarrassing. And they would say, oh, my parents say that's a cult. It's like, no, it's not. Yes, it is. But like, I guess I'm bringing this up because identity is maybe it's the biggest difference.
Yeah.
And that does take time regardless. But
Right.
as labels give you a preset identity, you don't have to do any self-exploration. You don't have to do any work. It doesn't take any time or effort. All you have to do is say, yeah, I identify with this. And then you get these check boxes of like, okay, this means that this is what you believe and this is what you think and this is how you act.
Yeah.
And that's why I think labels are dangerous. And so I grew up in this organization that should have made it very easy for me to feel a sense of purpose, feel a sense of belonging. And the contrast there was I was told by people that I had a bright future ahead of me. I was told by teachers that I was smart. I was told by my parents that I was going to be a great missionary someday. I was told that I was a great leader. I didn't see any of that.
Yeah.
I didn't see any of that at all. I did feel something deep inside me that like I I do want to do something great. Not necessarily, I'm sure there's an ego part to it where it's like everyone wants to be recognized for something, but it was also just like I feel this calling in a way to do something really impactful, and I have the fire to do it. But the things that I was being told and the identity that I was prescribed versus how I actually felt in the place that I was in, totally different. Now, so there was already a separation there. And I'm just now realizing that there was already that separation. So me stepping away from the religion that I grew up in and stepping away from all of that, stepping away from the expectation that when I turn 18, I'm going to go on a 2-year mission and marry a Mormon girl and have a bunch of kids and whatever. It wasn't that I was stepping away from that or that I was disconnecting myself from it. It's that I was realizing the disconnect. I was already separated from it. It already didn't resonate with me. And it already was not bringing me happiness. So this was the transition point when I started asking all these questions. Where I'm at now is I've accepted that there was that disconnect, and I've accepted that that's not right for me. And now I'm in a place where I feel like I'm on a path of realizing my true identity and my true purpose and the path that I not just have to walk, but the path that I want to walk.
Get to.
Yeah. It's my choice. And so I think the almost choosing your identity, which you can do, I think there's some maybe spiritual aspects that are already present, but I think largely you can assign meaning to things in life. And I think that you can also choose your own path. And so that's the biggest difference is now I do align with the identity that I have because it's my choice and it's mine and nobody else imposed it on me.
Yeah, I love that. Do you feel like you had a moment where, or like what age did you, because I think sometimes when we grow up with any kind of like religious background or any kind of like family fundamentals that you just don't really align with, like when you're a kid, you're like, this is just how it is. Like was there like a turning point where you're like, wait a second, or do you remember something happening, or was it just like this growth over time?
I get similar questions to that quite often, especially when I'm Ubering and like the topic of religion comes up in podcasts, whatever. They're like, oh, like when did you, like what broke the camel's back? And it's really hard to answer that question because at least in this organization, it's not physical abuse, it's psychological. And that's the kind of stuff that just one penny at a time sets on the table and adds some weight. And I don't know how familiar you are with religious deconstruction, but there's the term, the shelf. So everybody has a shelf. And whenever something doesn't resonate, whenever something doesn't make sense, when something doesn't add up, or when you have a question about something that isn't answered, you set it on the shelf. Over time, the shelf gets really heavy. Some people, when they claim they've had a faith crisis, it was really them looking at the shelf for a second and getting scared. They swipe it all off the shelf and ignore it. Other people, they look at the shelf when they're having this faith or identity crisis and they see there's cracks in this thing. And then they take a look around them and they're like, wait, this also doesn't make sense. Wait a second. They start adding stuff to the shelf and it breaks. And when the shelf breaks, that's when it's over. That's when you're like, you know what you have to do. So the main thread throughout everything is question everything. Like that is what I did. And I mean, you could ask, especially my mom, like I've always asked a lot of deep questions. And I've also had trouble with authority. And that's not because I think there's maybe a part of me deep down that wants to impress or please authority. Maybe that's a human thing. but I don't subscribe to I'm older than you, therefore I deserve your respect no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with I will offer you respect. You will offer me respect off the bat. And then if one of us doesn't respect the other person, then the other person isn't deserving of that respect.
Mm-hmm.
So to answer your question, the thing that really didn't make sense to me was how God, who was called Heavenly Father, the word Father was used for a reason. How God, the Father, could say, first of all, I am the embodiment of love and goodness. Also, I have this lovely place up here. It's perfect and there's no pain. I love you, but you are so evil and so dirty. And you will never be deserving of this. Ever. But I'm going to have my child, who's perfect, by the way. You're not. He's perfect, and he's going to come down, and you guys are going to do horrible stuff to him, and he is going to die for you. And you should feel so horrible about that. But if you do things exactly the way that I say, then you can live here. Mm-hmm. And you still will never deserve it, but you get the privilege of basking in my glory for eternity. Mm-hmm. Like, as logically as I operate things now, it's, if I go back, it was really just the feeling or the lack thereof, right? I did not feel love or peace or happiness from this thing that I was told was the source of all of that.
Yeah.
And to be clear, for the record, I don't know how many times I have to clarify this, but I do believe in God. I believe in divine consciousness and goodness and creativity and all of that. And I can't clearly define it, but I just don't believe that that is that.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because you mentioned that there is this kind of like push against authority, and that very much feels like authority. And so I think those two are probably connected on some level.
Interesting. That's such a stupid, obvious thing that I've never thought about. Like, what the heck? Wow.
Yeah, and it sounds like there was this like theme of like, you do this, you will do this. And then it was like this moment where it was like, I'm going to dig my heels and I'm going to not do this. I want to be told what to do.
Okay, so, and no shade as in like, wow, that's like, anyone could have thought of that. Like, literally, I didn't, like, it's so dumb that I haven't connected those dots before, because they've both been present. But, so, just to dive into the question, everything a little bit more for myself, whenever an authority figure would tell me to do something, I would ask why. And it wasn't like, as an adult, if you instruct a child to do something and they ask why, and your first response is to get defensive, you're the problem.
Because I said so.
Yeah. Best answer ever, right? Just fixes everything. Because I said so. I'm the parent. I'm the teacher. I don't give a shit.
Which also like leads kids to believe that when and what they're told by adults is true, and you must do it and you must follow, which then like don't even think about the parenting stuff.
Yeah.
Think about like predators and people who have ill intentions with children. Like, well, I'm an adult, I said so. That's why you have to do this.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, can lead down a really nasty path.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's dangerous. And as like, first of all, adults don't know what the hell they're doing either.
Right.
Like stop acting to children like you know what you're doing. None of us know what we're doing, okay?
We're all living life for the first time.
Exactly. Yeah. So I saw that very clearly. And whenever an adult would react that way, respect automatically goes through the floor.
Yep.
I don't respect you. And I don't have to. If somebody would entertain the question. Like, because again, I'm not asking to be rude. Please tell me why. I want to understand why. I very quickly learned that most adults do not have they don't know why they do things.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that connection to God, I guess this, I have the ultimate authority figure that has all these laws and rules and demands. And it's like, when you ask why, because you can't talk to God directly, like God doesn't come down and answer your question. So you get the answers from the people around you that think they see the truth. And their answers are, oh, just like read the scriptures more. Oh, just pray more. And it's like, that's not an answer.
Right.
Like, give me an answer. And now I'm at a place where I understand I'm not going to have the answer to everything.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that questions shouldn't be asked.
Right. That's a really good point. Yeah. Though there might not be an answer, it's still important to be curious and ask questions.
Yeah. That's a big deal. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, my relationship with, I believe to be the fake God that I was told to believe was a very abusive relationship.
Yeah.
And I saw that mirrored in a lot of the adults in my life, which is why I don't have kids yet. I've been married 4 years and intentionally have not had kids yet. A, to just set my life up, but B, to take the time to talk about the different aspects of parenting. And, Cole and I really just dive into all these different scenarios and ask these questions of like, what do we think about this? Like, how will we handle this? Oh, and it always fluctuates, but I'm doing my best to be an adult that doesn't operate solely off of assumptions.
The adult that you wish that you had. Yeah.
Yeah. It's good stuff.
For sure. I appreciate you doing that exercise.
Yeah. It was an exercise that took a couple minutes, and we've been talking about it for like half an hour now, which is crazy. So I didn't even think about planning an exercise for you.
That's okay.
But I think there's a reason for that. And this is also just uncovering another thing. I used to operate very emotionally. I think I was a lot more balanced when I was a kid. I operated very emotionally, but I also asked a lot of deep questions and stuff. I think that from the pain that I experienced throughout childhood and early adulthood, I allowed my experiences to turn me a little colder and kind of turn those emotions off to protect myself. I'm aware of this now and I'm working on it. But I still struggle with operating logically all the time. And it's funny because my approach was going to be to like approach it logically with you. Like, let's logically dissect what's going on here and why you're feeling this way. Whereas you were just like, the exercise that you presented to me just instantly made me feel like I dropped all of the thinking and analyzing. I instantly chose a room. I didn't have to, oh, well, which one makes more sense? I literally just picked it. And then when I envisioned myself standing there and then sitting down, like I teared up. Like it was all about the emotion. So,
yeah, it's an interesting exercise because I think so much of it goes off of instinct, like, and you have to follow that, right? Like, follow the instinct that helps you pick a room. Follow the instinct of like, what age am I sitting on the bed? And there's a reason that those things matter, Like, obviously, we figured that out. So.
Yeah. Well, I have a couple of ideas. First of all, I just want to point out what we're wearing is hilarious.
The neutrals.
We're matching.
We're
just flipped.
We're flipped.
That's happened with almost every single person.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's.
If you go back and watch just the beginning of every episode or whatever, you'll see almost every person I've like coordinated with them.
Interesting.
And have never planned it.
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't plan this.
We didn't. Promise. So anyway, when I realized at the very beginning what we were wearing, I was like, this is so stupid.
So
this happens
funny.
all the time. Great. This is just, okay.
We love a nice neutral.
Yes, we do. So now I want to invite you to just relax, get comfortable, because you're always on the giving end of this. So this is exciting. I'll have you close your eyes too. Okay. And instead of thinking about your childhood and imagining you as a child, I instead encourage you to look at your life now and think of a few things that you are dissatisfied with. Because life is never everything that we envision or want. There's always some things, there's always some challenges, and maybe even some things that we just wish weren't the case. So if you can envision those things, you might be envisioning either the people or the places or the objects. Try to morph those into what they feel like. Think about the colors that they represent and the shapes and the textures. And maybe you're thinking of different things. So you're almost morphing these into an object that holds this emotion and has a certain feel to it. And it could be different objects representing different things that you're dissatisfied with, or it could just be one thing. And be thinking about, again, the colors and what that might represent. Because different feelings have different wavelengths, and so do colors. And I invite you to choose one that sticks out the most.
What's interesting is I feel like they all have the same underlying tone. And so I instinctively just kind of threw them all into one.
Okay.
But what I'm kind of picturing is like this gray, like, sphere. I don't know how else to describe it, but like this, like, kind of like black energy around it.
Okay. So really just sit with that, and you can, just in your mind, you can reach out your hands. And I want you to hold that in your hands. And then I want you to pull it in to your chest and embrace this thing that you've been dissatisfied with, this thing that you're upset about, this thing that is causing you pain or discomfort or anger or sadness, whatever this gray. And is this sphere smooth? Or is it spiky?
Smooth. It's smooth, yeah.
Okay. So really just embrace this and don't shy away from allowing yourself to feel what this feels like. Like, feel how smooth the sphere is. Feel how big it is. Feel how heavy it is. Allow yourself to really just connect with the color and the energy that this object is emitting. And then what we're going to say to that object is, you belong here. I know that you don't have anywhere else to go, and you're safe here. How does that feel?
It feels interesting because all of those things feel like they are, like I said, they all have the same kind of theme. And so it feels like they're like, for lack of a better word, like a missing part of me. And so it's interesting to, turn that around and welcome a part that feels like it's not there, but it probably is there. I think I just do a lot of discounting of what I already have or who I already have.
Yeah, it could be, and you can open your eyes now if you want, but I'm thinking, and I have no idea the feeling that you just experienced and all that, but sometimes it is a thing that's absent, and what we need to do is accept the absence. Sometimes it might be a parental figure, right? The parent that you wish you could have had growing up that you didn't. And so you're holding this absence of them. And instead of you wishing that you had them to fill that hole, instead you just acknowledge that there's a hole there and say that, hey, that's okay.
Yeah.
Other times it is, like you said, a thing that is present. It's just your brain hasn't been seeking proof that it's there.
Yeah. Yeah. Or is for some reason, one of the, I guess the entire kind of theme of that, for me at least, was that it's like this comparing and dissatisfaction in different areas of my life. And so,
Comparing to what?
the people around me. Yeah. I do that a lot. And I think with the things that I was thinking of, and I know that I do this, and I try really hard not to, but
Work in progress.
Yeah. I often, like, I want something, I work really hard for it, and I do, and I get it, and then I'm like, okay, what's next? And then, suddenly I'm dissatisfied with what I have right now because I just want what's next. And it's really hard for me to let those two things exist at once. For me to be excited about what's possible down the road and to be happy where I am right now. It's really hard for me to do that. And it's been a thing for as long as I can remember with like school stuff, like especially like I, was in college and I'm first generation college student. So that was a really big deal and it was really exciting. Okay, I get in college and I'm like, okay, well now I just want to graduate and get a job. And then I'm like wishing away college. And then I go to grad school and I'm like, okay, sweet, accomplishment, get into grad school. I'm just wishing this away. And then I get my first job and I'm like, oh, but now I have 3,000 postgraduate hours. I just want this to fly by, wishing it all away, and then, or like, I really want a relationship. Okay, I'm met my partner now. It's great. But I'm just kind of like, well, automatically jumping to like the next step. And, when are we going to make the next step? Which suddenly makes me unhappy with what I have right now. And so it's kind of this pattern which I try to just catch myself in because it's just been really difficult for me to just be happy with it right now. Even with my business, I'm like, okay, I have a nearly full client caseload, about to be on a wait list. Business is great. Where can I get licensed in other states? I'm like, why am I even going there right now?
Yeah.
So it's just, it's this fine line for me of being motivated, being goal-oriented, looking for the future, being excited about that stuff, and also being okay with where I am now. Because I tend to find myself feeling dissatisfied with where I am right now. There's in pockets, of course. Like, it's not this constant feeling, but whenever I start looking at the future, I'm like, oh, so what I have right now sucks.
Yeah, you wish the future was now. Yeah. So, and you also mentioned, you've mentioned dissatisfaction, and then you said, I just want to be okay with now. To me, okay is neutral.
Yeah.
That's sitting in the middle.
Yeah, I think my fear is that if I find myself feeling too content or too happy with what I have, then that for me will
make you lazy.
Oh yeah, I'll stop. And the thought of stopping is like, there could be nothing worse for me,
Yeah. I resonate with all of that in my own way. That's one of the things that drove me to take a hard look at that term self-improvement.
Yeah.
Which I could tell when I was talking about that, you're like, interesting. That's very...
Taking notes.
Yeah, like... So, were you holding that absence of stuff, or was it really just a realization of, wait, I do have what I want, and I need to accept it and say, you're safe here. Like, if everyone else is struggling with this, if everyone else is having this issue with never being satisfied and always wanting to be somewhere else, always rushing to the next place and never being where they are, then everything that you have, if it was given to somebody else, it wouldn't be safe with them either.
Right.
So telling all of the things that are present in your life, not just the things you have, but the things that are, and just saying, you belong here and you're safe here, as in, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to love you. I'm going to appreciate you. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the word appreciation stands out because I feel like that's what I lack sometimes. Or like I'll have, I discount this week when I planned out my week, I have like a habit tracker, like a weekly affirmation, like things like that. My weekly affirmation this week was stop discounting the positive.
Okay.
Because I am so bad at that. Like, even if, I guess like the most recent thing is just like being in this new business world and like having my practice and like leaving my job. Like, that was a big deal, right? But, and when my parents are like, we're so proud of you, and my partner's like, that's so exciting. Like, I'm so happy for you. I'm kind of like, well, anybody could do that. You know what I mean? Like, I can't see that for myself, what they see for me. And that's been a big part of what I struggle with is that I'm like, okay, Katie, that's positive. Don't discount that and only look at, well, how could I grow it more? How could I, you know what I mean? So I don't know, just, it's an internal conflict, and I'm often actively working on that. I have a lot of perfectionistic traits, and those show up in a bunch of different ways. And one of them is, as you could probably tell, is very high expectations for myself.
Is there somebody of importance in your past that was or is very prideful and boastful, and also putting down of other people's achievements? Or maybe it's not one person, but there are like a couple people that embody those traits.
Yeah. No one that's like very close to me. Like, I'm the oldest first generation college student. Like, so my parents are like, and I'm like making education this big thing, but for them it is. And so
Sure.
they were always and are very proud of me. However, I do feel like throughout my life, I've been an underdog. Like, and I've had to like be that, like,
Always second place kind of thing.
yeah, and in a ton of different ways. Like, I grew up in a family who my parents were very young. My mom had me when she was a senior in high school. And so just like that brings struggles in itself. And like, we didn't always have everything. And like, they're in an incredible place now, and they're not together anymore, but separately, they're in really great places. But I think like that just kind of sets up a hardship. And then go through school, and like, I had really bad ADHD and was medicated for a while. My parents had me on medication, which helped. But then when I became rebellious, and I was like, I'm not going to take this anymore. I'd like put my Adderall in my mouth, walk outside and spit in the bush and go to school. And they knew because I'd fail school. But like,
that didn't work out very well.
no, but like, school was so hard for me, and for other people, it just wasn't. And I don't know, I guess it's just always been this like, I have to try so much harder than other people for certain things, which has been, I don't know, there's been some lasting effects of that, I think. And
yeah,
even this like past week, and I'll tell you a story that feels really silly and really small and really dumb, but for me, I'm like, I have been thinking about it every day since it happened, and you're gonna be like, oh my God, you need a Xanax, girl.
Well, reality's a mirror, so even if it's a small thing.
So my boyfriend and I joined a kickball team, okay? And so...
Wait, me and my...
Really?
Yeah.
No way. Germantown?
No, Hot Mess Sports.
Okay, different one. So we joined this kickball team.
Okay, cool.
I've never played a foot sport in my life. Growing up, I only ever played softball and did taekwondo, okay? So never had to kick a ball. And so...
Gotcha.
But I went into this thing and I'm like, oh my God, okay, I'm so nervous about it. I'm going to be so embarrassed if I don't do perfect, if I'm not great at it. And I was like, went up, it was my turn to kick the ball. And I was so anxious about it, so stressed about it, that I look up at the pitcher when I'm going to kick and miss the ball. And I'm like, that's exactly what I thought was going to happen. And feels so stupid and silly because like I'm looking around and other people are doing the same thing, but the fact that I did it is like not okay. And so literally in that moment, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to come back next week. Maybe I should just give up on this. And then I've been trying, again, that feels so silly and small, but for someone who has really high expectations for themselves, my self-talk said, oh, you're not athletic. Your other teammates are unhappy with you. You didn't help the team. Like, it's embarrassing. Like, you should just go home. You shouldn't come back.
Yeah, the team's better off without you.
Yes,
that
it
kind of
turned
thing.
into this huge thing, and it was so silly and stupid. But anyway, all of that to say that I'm trying really hard to shift perspective, and I've been looking at that instance as like, I tried something new, and that's what people will remember was that, you know, my boyfriend's not like, oh my God, how embarrassing that I invited her to be on our kickball team. He's like, Katie's never played kickball before. That's so cool that she was willing to come with.
And he's probably just like, I like spending time with you.
Yes, and it's not ever what I'm thinking about it or how I'm looking at it, and I those are cognitive distortions that I talked about earlier, but it's so hard for me not to get wrapped up in those myself. And I texted my therapist friend the other day and I'm like, Gabby, I am still hung up on this kickball thing. And she was like, oh my gosh.
Girl.
Yeah. She's like, oh, okay. I promise it's not a big deal. But anyway, all of that to say that the positive is that I tried something new and I went out and I went for it and I discount that. And that sucks.
There's something that I would like to draw your attention to, which maybe it's something you already know, but when I started becoming aware of I am, or like statements that are like the present, that especially I am statements, I don't think we realize how powerful those are.
Yeah.
And so when you have said multiple times throughout this episode, I am really bad at that, that is an affirmation.
Yeah.
You're reaffirming to yourself,
Yeah.
I am bad at that. And that becomes a belief, something that you say over and over. It shapes your beliefs. And then it gets really dangerous whenever your brain finds proof of your beliefs. Whenever it's able to connect the dots, it then becomes a conviction.
Yeah.
And that's something that's very, very difficult. Like, beliefs can change, convictions, very difficult. So something that really helped me with this, because I understand what that's like, and I still, it's still something that I'm working on. But I would say I've gotten way better at it, even just in the last year. And that was the main thing that helped, was becoming aware of when I say I am this thing. So for you, just a way to shift it, instead of saying like, I am really bad at that, it's just like, I've struggled with it, but I'm putting in the work to pay attention to the positive. I'm putting in the effort to really just appreciate the goodness that's already there. I don't even have to find it, really. I just have to accept it. That's something I've noticed, is a lot of times we feel like we have to like achieve this thing, or we have to like learn to find and seek, you know, we have to seek out the good. We have to, it's like, no, that all of this shit's already here. Like, it's not like a mystery. Like the love and the goodness and the beauty is already here around us. All we need to do is stop closing ourselves off. We just have to accept it. We have to open up. There's nothing to be found there.
Right.
I think there are some mysteries of the universe that are meant to be found. Maybe that's not even true, though. Maybe everything that we could possibly want to know about and experience is all right here. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard when you fall into those thinking traps, and when they do become convictions, it is. And you know, we talk to ourselves so much harsher than we would ever talk to anybody else. And so and it's so automatic, and like, I didn't even hear myself say, I am not good at, I just said it. You know what I mean? There was no, it's just so automatic and ingrained. It's hard to undo sometimes, but I've been trying to be a lot more conscious of that.
Yeah. And you could also shift that phrase, instead of I am trying to be more conscious of it.
I am being.
Like, I am becoming more conscious of it.
Yeah.
Because then you're telling yourself that you're on the right path.
Yeah.
Especially with this through line of feeling like you try so hard and just keep coming up short.
Mm-hmm.
I did track and field in middle school.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I ever won a gold medal.
Mm-hmm.
I always got a silver.
Mm-hmm.
I was always second place. Not always, like I did not place second, but the times when I would get so close, second place.
Mm-hmm.
And it was even stupid stuff like fourth grade gym class when they would whip the scooters out and you guys would have scooter day.
Yes.
Like we would do these scooter relay races. I would get second place every time.
Yeah.
I wanted to be the fastest. I wanted to be the best.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt like there was this constant reminder that I wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, everyone's got to be the best at something.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why can't I win?
Yes, that is that's how I've found that feeling a lot, where it's like, why am I not like excelling in one area? I can do a lot of things and they're kind of okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're both earth signs. As you learn more about astrology, I'm a
Okay.
Taurus.
Okay.
So we are right next to each other on the wheel, if you will.
Yeah.
Same element, which is funny that we're wearing earth
Yeah.
tones. The reason why I bring that up is you had mentioned that you didn't say it exactly like this, but you're very adaptable.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you get the thing that you want, you acclimate to it so fast, it becomes your new reality, and you just accept it so fast
Mm-hmm.
that you're ready for something new.
Yeah.
And I'm the same way. Like when we move, my wife and I moved a couple times.
Mm-hmm.
She's like so attached to the place that we're moving from, and she's like really sad about it. And there's the adjustment, and especially moving out of state, it's like missing family, all this stuff. For me,
Yeah.
like I'm in
the
this
same way.
yeah, like I acclimate to the new room instantly. I want everything set up instantly. Like I'm ready to go.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
So we talked about I am statements. The last thing that I might leave with you is the word trying.
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed you've mentioned that, like, I'm trying to do this. Mm-hmm. If you have a history of trying and failing and feeling like you try to be the best, or you try to do whatever, and you just never quite hit the mark, stop using that word, because it's a reminder of it keeps bringing the past into the present. When you say, I'm trying to do better at this,
It
Yoda,
implies
there
is no try.
Do or do not, there is no try.
Yeah.
And he's real for that.
Yeah.
He's so real for that. That's actually, I'm not even a huge fan of Star Wars.
Yeah.
But that's a line that is, if there's one thing to take from Star Wars, it's that line.
Mm-hmm.
And I in a relationship, for instance, like in my marriage, there are times when I'm needing to work on something, and we're having this conversation. I'm like, like I'm trying to improve at this. And I used to say that a lot more often. Lo and behold, I wasn't making much progress. When I started shifting it to, I am working on this, and I am improving in this, all of a sudden, not only does it help the other person see, like, you know what, you're right, like you are improving, but it also allows me to see it. When I say I'm trying, there's no marker of success at all.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a really good point.
So I hope that can help.
Yeah.
In any sort of way, just like your exercise helped me.
Yeah. No, and I think that and just like my, kind of thought on that is that I tell clients all the time, especially when I work with clients who are struggling with addiction. I worked with this other therapist a while ago who was brilliant. He's been in the field for a very long time. And he taught me that when you work with people who are struggling with addiction, something that comes up is they'll say things like, I am a recovering addict, or no, excuse me, not a recovering addict. I'm an addict in recovery, or like the way that they phrase it in some way, shape, or form. But long story short, all that they hear is, I'm an addict in recovery. And so it's like, when he kind of pointed out that like that self-talk is so important, because when they hear that, they're not hearing the most important part of the sentence. Your brain stops after it hears, I'm an addict. It's like, okay,
Yep.
that's me.
Yeah, I am an addict. It's funny too. The episode I actually recorded an episode with a good friend on Thursday, just a couple days ago, and addiction was the theme.
Yeah.
It was like the big thing. It's something that I don't like about AA, and I don't know if this is the case across all AAs, but I had a friend go through AA, and something that he was adamant about is he was saying, like, I am an alcoholic. Like, that was his identity.
Yeah.
And they do that, I would assume, as a reminder of, like, listen, you're an alcoholic. That means that if you consume alcohol, you're going to go off the rails. Like, you know your behavior patterns, stay away from alcohol. Makes sense. But what is that supposed to do to you when you've been sober for 30 years and you tell people you're an alcoholic when they ask?
Right.
Or you're just telling yourself that you're an alcoholic.
Right. Because
like,
not currently.
Yeah. It's like, no, you're not, dude. Like, you're free. You're sober. That's true. I am sober from alcohol, right? We all have some vice, whether it's social media or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. The I am statements, you just got to be very careful with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Self-talk is something that's so, it's possible. You have to be so conscious. And I think a lot of like what we do in day-to-day life is just so unconscious or
Totally.
subconscious.
Automatic.
Automatic. Yes. Everything's automatic, right? Like, same drive to work every day, same cup of coffee in the morning, same route that I walk my dog. Like, I don't have to think too much about most of the things. And so I think life just becomes so automatic that we have to, it's take a second and pause. And I've been not trying, but I've been doing a lot of different grounding techniques and just putting some feelers out there for like whatever feels right, practicing some affirmations, setting weekly goals.
Yeah.
Things like that, because I find that they're really, it's helpful to just take a pause. We have to like schedule a pause sometimes.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier, just to go full circle with everything that we've talked about today, you mentioned earlier that that's something that you're kind of afraid of, is stopping. The perfectionist, the workaholic, whatever it is. And I get that guilt that you feel when you're not being productive. Especially because I see how I used to waste so much time. I wasted years of my life doing nothing when now I'm actively building something. And so stopping is necessary. And I think for both of us to really appreciate how far we've come and to really appreciate who we are now versus who we used to be. And even just appreciate the journey that we've been on. Because you can hate the journey you've been on all you want, but it's the journey that you've been on.
Right.
So learn to appreciate it. And I do. I am glad that I was raised in the situation that I was, as shitty as it was. It's because it did shape me into who I am.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe we can just commit to each other to not try, but just be more present and really allow ourselves to open up to and appreciate things that are present right now.
Yeah.
Because I think that if we looked at each other and like the way that where we came from and like where we are now, we'd be so proud of like every aspect of our life. But then we're looking at it and scrutinizing it. How do I make this better? And I think we just need to chill for a little bit.
Yeah. Have you ever read the poem? Maybe it's not a poem, it's more like a speech, but Always Wear Sunscreen, it's called. I'll have to send it to you. But
Yeah,
it embodies the entire theme of what we've talked about.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, Katie, thanks for doing this with me.
Of course.
This was a very interesting. This is going to be the last episode that I have a guest on for a long time.
Oh, really?
I'm going to be changing things up. Yeah. So I think this is a great way to send off the whole guest thing.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, it's been a pleasure. It's always nice to have some deeper conversations with people who are interested in, what I do and the theme of my work. And, it's not even just the theme of my work. It's helpful in every aspect of our life. So.
Yeah. Well, even though it was like an hour and a half or whatever, I do feel that my inner child was healed a little bit today.
Good.
So yeah.
I'll chalk that up as a win this week.
Sweet. Yes. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Alrighty. We'll see you guys next time.